In either your informative or your persuasive speech, you'll need to use a visual aid. Your book talks about the different kinds of visual aids you can use, and I'll be paying attention to what type of aid you use versus what the best options for your particular speech would be. So you definitely should be familiar with the different types of visual aids and strategies for using them that your book discusses. In this presentation, though, I'm going to talk about some of the common mistakes I see students make with visual aids in hopes that you won't repeat these mistakes in your speech. You need to make sure that you practice handling your visual aid. You need to make sure that you practice with it because most folks don't realize that the nerves associating with giving speeches will impact their ability to hold on to things while speaking, but nerves do have an impact. You don't want to drop something that's valuable or do anything else that takes your audience's attention away from your speech. For example, when I was a graduate student, a student in a basic public speaking course taught by a friend was giving a speech on fire safety. He didn't think about practicing with his visual aid and ended up spraying the first few rows of his audience with a fire extinguisher. Be smarter than that student and learn from his mistake. Practice with your visual aid and don't spray your audience with dangerous chemicals. Remember that the point of a visual aid is that folks need to be able to see it. So make sure that you think about where you're going to stand when using your visual aid, especially if it's some three-dimensional object that you want people to see. You don't want to turn and point to something on your visual aid so that your back is to your audience and blocking one side of the room from seeing that visual aid. Think about where you need to stand ahead of time so that you don't make this mistake. If you need assistance from someone, plan for it ahead of time. I had a student once who wanted to do a speech on hair weaving. She didn't get a volunteer ahead of time, and as a result, in the middle of her speech we waited for an uncomfortable minute or so for someone to volunteer. The whole audience was uncomfortable, and that minute seemed like 10 minutes. Finally, a nice person with long hair gave in and volunteered, but we were all very uncomfortable, and she was very embarrassed, and that minute or two counted against her speech time, putting her over the time limit for the speech. This is a very simple rule. If your visual aid isn't in use, we shouldn't see it. If you're doing a PowerPoint presentation and talking in between two slides for 5 minutes, don't leave slide number 1 up the whole time, which will distract your audience. Put a blank slide in between your 2 slides so that we see nothing until you're ready for us to see something. If you're showing us a three-dimensional object, you'll need to make sure that that object is covered by a towel or a sheet or hidden in some other way until you're ready to talk about it. And once you've talked about it, cover it back up. If you're not talking about it, we shouldn't see it. People tend to use handouts when they want to give people extra information or when they want to show something to people like a small image that must be on paper. If you need to use handouts, here's the best way to do it. Hand out the aid face down at the beginning of your speech. It won't count against your speech time. And as you're handing it out, ask the audience not to turn it over until you ask them to. Once you're ready for them to see the handout, ask them to turn it over, talk through it, and then ask them to turn it back over again. Can you think of why you'd want to make sure people look at your handouts only when you want them to? If you're thinking that you don't want them to ignore your speech and read your handout instead, you'd be right. You want to minimize the chance that people will ignore you in favor of looking at your handout, and so using handouts in this manner I've just explained will make it more likely that they'll listen to you while you're speaking instead of paying attention to your handout. Unless it's an image that is originally in black and white, all visual aids should be in color. It's too easy now, especially with products like PowerPoint and Prezi, to create aids using color. Even handouts should be run through the color printer if there are colors in the handout. Audiences expect color, and you should deliver it when it's possible. Also make sure that the colors contrast. Orange lettering on a yellow slide isn't going to be something folks can read. So remember that whole visual part of the visual aid. That's the whole point. So you need to make sure that you use colors that contrast so people can see your great information. Have you ever heard of Murphy's Law? It's the saying that if something can go wrong, it probably will go wrong. Murphy's Law goes double for media products. You can't control a power loss, a projector bulb going out, or any other possible media or electronic problem outside of your realm of control. So make sure that you do 2 things if you're using media. First, if there's a way to cover your bases should something go wrong, do it. For example, if you're giving a speech with a PowerPoint presentation, make handouts with your slides on them in case something goes wrong. Second, don't ever rely so much on some media element that you can't do your speech without it. If you rely too heavily on some form of media and that media doesn't come through for you, you're in deep trouble. So make sure that you don't put yourself in that position. In our class, you don't have to make copies of PowerPoint presentations in case something goes wrong. But remember that when you're outside of class and speaking professionally, you need to have a backup plan when you can. As with concerns about contrasting colors, you also need to make sure that your visual aids are large enough to be seen. Don't use images on a PowerPoint slide that are grainy because you've used too small an image for the slide. If you have to use small images, think about making them handouts instead. Again, a visual aid does you no good and can possibly even do you harm if no one can see it. Make sure that if you use any information or images from someone else that you not only cite that in your speech, but that you also cite that source on your visual aid. It helps people remember your great source choices, but also protects you from claims of academic dishonesty such as plagiarism if you happen to forget to cite that source, because you have that source also written on your visual aid. Anything that is illegal generally is doubly illegal on state property, and our college has no alcohol on campus, so please don't even bring in empty bottles or cans. You'll not be able to continue your speech, you'll be sent from the classroom, and reported if you bring anything like this into the class, so please don't do it. Stunts are not visual aids. I once had a student build a pyramid of soda cans, only to knock them on the hard flooring for effect. He thought that was a good idea for getting attention and a good idea for a visual aid. It does get attention, but it's not positive attention you'll be getting. And visual aids should have something to do with your speech. In other words, they should be relevant to what you're discussing. In addition, visual aids should add something to your speech. I once had a student do an informative speech on the history of McDonald's. That's a fine topic, but his poster board was a picture of the Golden Arches. Who doesn't know that the symbol of McDonald's is the Golden Arches? The visual aid added nothing to his speech. I also had a student do a speech on the University of Georgia mascot, the Uga Bulldog. It was a great topic, but her visual aid was a stuffed Uga dog. Really? Did she think that her classmates at the University of Georgia didn't already know what their mascot looked like? It was a completely wasted opportunity. So remember, no stunts, and make sure that your visual aids are relevant and add something to your speech. You also cannot bring any animals into the classroom. I'm sure that your pet snake has never gotten out of its cage before, but remember Murphy's Law? Yep, it'll get out in our classroom. People have fears and allergies associated to animals as well, so no animals, please. You can use videos to show us animals if you need to do so for a speech. Finally, no weapons of any kind are allowed. Again, let's go back to Murphy's Law. Enough said, right? No weapons at all. That's it for visual aids. If you have questions about an aid you want to see or need help in any way creating a visual aid, don't hesitate to let me know and we'll work on it together. Please err on the side of asking me about your visual aid if you think that there might be any problem at all with it.